Headlines: in Yemen, voting in the one-candidate presidential election ends amid fears that Saleh's regime will continue to remain. The US military opens fire on Afghans protesting, American troops burning copies of the Quran. And Egyptians rally outside the UK embassy in Cairo to protest what they call British racism. Hello, it's 9:30 p.m. here in Tehran. You're with Press TV's World News. Polls have closed in Yemen's presidential election that would see power transferred to the former dictator's vice president.
This is a day of holy happiness. This is a day of victory. Now we're officially announcing the end of Ali Abdullah Saleh's era. Thanks to God, he's gone. Today we're building the new Yemen, the democratic and happy Yemen that all of the youth and women have dreamed about.
The election has been much criticised for having Vice President Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi as the sole candidate. Many saw the vote as a referendum on Hadi's appointment. Opposition groups boycotted the vote over fears that the poll would not put an end to Ali Abdullah Saleh's regime. In the southern city of Aden, gunmen from the Southern Movement stormed half of the polling stations as part of a civil disobedience campaign. They also confiscated ballot boxes, saying the election fails to meet their aspirations for autonomy. At least 9 people have been killed and many others injured in election day violence.
Abdrabbuh Mansour Hadi, Yemen's presidential nominee, voting in an election in which he's the sole candidate. Hadi speaks of what he calls a bright future for Yemen.
We come to this polling station, and on this day we close a chapter and open a clean white page in which to write the future of the new Yemen.
Yemenis are split over the election. The proponents of the vote say it will mark the beginning of an end to Ali Abdullah Saleh's era. This is while they promise to continue pushing for the trial of Saleh and his henchmen. The opponents of the election maintain the vote will make no difference and it will keep the, quote, tyrannical regime in place. Protests against Saleh have been continuing since he left for the US earlier this year. The vote has been held under a power transfer deal brokered by Saudi Arabia and supported by the United States. This, as the Riyadh regime as well as the US have constantly been accused by the demonstrators of trying to keep the Saleh regime in Yemen as intact as possible by crafting a deal, which would guarantee handover of power to another person within the circle. Yemen's revolution began after regional uprisings against US-backed unpopular regimes engulfed the Middle East and North Africa in early 2011. People from all walks of life chose one anti-regime slogan resounding in other Arab nations. The people want the fall of the regime. The Saleh regime gave a heavy-handed response to the people's revolution. Brutal crackdown on the protests with large numbers of people dead or maimed. Saleh's Western backers, including the US, have turned a blind eye to the crackdown.
The U.S. Defense Secretary has apologized for the desecration of the Holy Quran by American soldiers in Afghanistan. The UNPNETA has pledged a swift investigation into the incident. Angry Afghans gathered outside Bagram Air Base to protest against the desecration but faced U.S. troops' fire. The protesters demanded the withdrawal of foreign troops from their country.
Afghans have once again come out to protest the presence of occupying foreign forces in their country. This time they were angered by yet another insult to their religious sanctities. The protesters staged demonstrations in Kabul as well as outside the US Bagram Air Base north of the capital, where American forces set fire to copies of the Muslim holy book. They surrounded the military base, calling for the trial of the perpetrators and the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. Reacting to the protest rallies, US troops opened fire to disperse the crowd gathering outside the Bagram air base. Witnesses say several people were killed and injured. Among the protesters were a number of Afghan employees who were fired from their jobs at the base because of the protest against the sacrilegious act.
There were also a number of Afghan nationals who were working inside Bagram Air Base, and when they witnessed the incident and when they saw that the Holy Quran was burned by the American forces, and they were trying to stop the American forces, but then they have been fired from their jobs.
The US commander of NATO forces has apologized over the action, ordering an investigation into the case.
We are thoroughly investigating the incident, and we are taking steps to ensure this does not ever happen again. And I offer my sincere apologies for any offense this may have caused.
This is not the first time that foreign troops have insulted the religious sanctities of Afghan people. Occupying foreign troops have on several occasions burned the copies of the Holy Quran, triggering nationwide protests.
Afghan President Hamid Karzai has invited Taliban leaders to direct talks with his government. Karzai also urged Pakistan to facilitate negotiation efforts in order to end the decade-old war in Afghanistan. The Afghan president has recently stepped up efforts to bring the militants to the negotiating table. Earlier, he asked senior Pakistani cleric Maulana Sami ul Haq to help mediate talks with the Taliban. Karzai is not the only one who wants reconciliation with the militant group. US and NATO officials have been also pushing for talks with the Taliban in recent years. This after NATO suffered heavy casualties in its battle with the militants. A large number of Afghan civilians also lost their lives during the war. In the headlines today, protesters have staged a rally in front of the UK embassy in the Egyptian capital, Cairo. The protesters denounced Britain's racism and discrimination. They also called for justice in the death of Karim Assad. The demonstrators say Assad was killed in the hands of British authorities. Jordan's former Prime Minister says he resigned after rejecting calls from the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council to allow his country to be used against Syria. Maruf al-Bakhit says the US, Saudi Arabia and Qatar intended to impose their agenda on Jordan. The GCC had reportedly conditioned Jordan's accession to the organization on Amman's agreeing to their use of Jordanian soil as a base against Syria. Reports also say Jordan's intelligence apparatus, which has close links to the US and Israel, has turned the region near the Syrian border into a military zone. Tens of thousands of people, including 18,000 Salafist militants, are said to be stationed in the region. Syria has repeatedly blamed the unrest in the country on what it calls foreign-backed armed gangs. Israel's premier has acknowledged the importance of the Islamic revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa. Benjamin Netanyahu says that these revolutions have put enormous pressure on Israel's defense and security.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has admitted the popular uprisings against the dictators in several Arab countries are Islamic in nature. He says that this fact undermines Tel Aviv's position in its so-called peace talks with the Palestinians. Several autocratic rulers in the Arab world, like Egypt's Hosni Mubarak, had close relations with Tel Aviv and managed to maintain ties with Israel. The ousting of these dictators has now further weakened Israel's position in the region. This is particularly important because these popular uprisings have been Islamic and genuinely opposed to Israel and the West. Muslims in countries such as Egypt and Jordan are calling for breaking of all ties with Tel Aviv. This anti-Israeli sentiment has been growing in the Arab world since the outbreak of popular uprisings last year.
Down, down, USA! Down, down, USA! Down, down, USA!
The Islamic revolutions in the region have created new challenges for Israel, the US, and their allies. There are simply too many unknown factors involved in assessing what these newly awakened countries will do with regards to Israel. Throughout the uprisings, both the US and Israel have been stuck between rock and a hard place. They have struggled to take a concrete stance. On one hand, Washington and Tel Aviv wanted and still want to support their dictator allies in the region. But they also see the inevitable fall of these autocratic regimes. The West and Israel have been downplaying the importance of these revolutions through mainstream media. In some instances, like the Bahrain Revolution, they simply ignore the movement and continue their support for autocratic rulers. On the other hand, Iran's position on the Islamic revolutions in the region has remained constant. Tehran has adopted a non-interventionist approach. It argues that the voice of people must be heard without any foreign meddling in their domestic affairs.
Lebanon says it will not take part in the Western-backed conference on Syria. This after Russia disagreed that the event be held in Tunisia later this week. Lebanon's Foreign Minister Adnan Mansour said the decision is made in line with Beirut's policy to stay away from developments in Syria. Earlier, Russia boycotted the conference, dubbed the Friends of Syria.
Separate groups of the opposition have been called to Tunisia, but the representatives of the Syrian government have not been invited to the conference. This means that the interests of a large part of the Syrian population, which support the authorities, will not be represented.
The unrest drags on as the foreign.
The conference, backed by the US, the European Union and some Arab countries, is to be held in response to Russia and China's vetoing of an anti-Syria UN resolution earlier this month. Our correspondent has told us more about the reasons behind Lebanon's decision to boycott the pro-Syrian opposition conference in Tunisia.
It's no surprise that this current government, which has as a majority Hezbollah and its allies, has taken this stance because it's a government known to be very close to the Syrian president, especially if taken into consideration Hezbollah's very close alliance with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and how Bashar al-Assad has assisted the resistance in general in Lebanon. So, as I said, this current policy is up to expectations. Everybody would expect Lebanon at least to take such a stance, if not more. There are certain Lebanese decisions or resolutions between the Lebanese government and Syrian government which don't allow for Lebanon to take any steps like participating in such a conference.
More anti-austerity demonstrations have broken out in Greece just hours after Europe agreed on a new bailout package for the debt-ridden country. Gas station owners and civil servants have gathered outside the ministries of Labour and Economy. They demand the reduction of taxes on gasoline as well as the protection of wages and pensions against further cuts. 15,000 public sector workers will lose their jobs as part of the new austerity programme. Pensions and wages will also be further reduced and taxes increased. The reforms are in exchange for a second bailout for the country, which was agreed on by Eurozone finance ministers early on Tuesday after 13 hours of talks.
I'm not at all optimistic because I see that all this loan will go back to the pockets of those who gave it. All those who gave us money will take this money back.
We already know what this will be. It is a haircut to the wage earners, haircut to the pensioners,